We absolutely need social bonds to thrive. And men who are lone wolves are doing themselves, frankly, a disservice to their own health and to their own longevity. Because at least in the research that I've looked at, like I said, the greatest factor known in long-term health and happiness is human connection.
Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
This interview with Dr. Molly Maloof may just be our favorite of 2022 so far. And after we finished recording, Dr. Molly said, that was one of the best interviews I've ever done. And she's been on some notable podcasts, which I'll mention in a few moments here. But before I introduce her, I wanted to give you the heads up that you may want to invite your romantic partner to listen to this episode with you. At the very least, you're going to want to take notes, whether it's on your phone or written notes. She drops so many dimes and pearls of wisdom that you're not going to want to let go of. So I highly recommend that you have some device for taking notes on this. Let's get into it. Our guest today has a few things to say about the current state of the healthcare system. In fact, Dr. Molly Maloof would put healthcare system in air quotes. It's not a system designed to improve your health at all, but one focused on sickness and ensuring that insurance companies get paid. She's given it a more accurate name, the Sickness Billing Industrial Complex. Boy, did you nail that one. Now, in light of this, Dr. Molly decided to ask a bigger question. If the number one factor in whether you're going to live a long and healthy life is the quality of your relationships, then why is nothing in our healthcare system, especially the medicine, focusing on enhancing the quality of our relationships? That's why Dr. Molly founded Adamo Bioscience, a company whose mission it is to scientifically enhance healthy social connection in all its forms to promote happiness and human flourishing. That's badass. And one of the big swings she's taking with this venture is to see whether creating love drugs, actual medicines, could reliably enhance the quality of your relationships. For example, imagine being in a romantic relationship for 10 years and having access to a love drug that could bring back those feelings you had during the honeymoon phase of your relationship. Now that would be revolutionary, and we're going to dive into that possibility today. But first, here's a little more background on the impressive Dr. Molly Maloof. Dr. Molly is a practicing MD with extensive history working on optimizing health and performance for many of Silicon Valley's top executives. She's worked as an independent advisor and strategy consultant to over 45 technology companies in San Fran and Silicon Valley. She's been a guest on Dave Asprey's Bulletproof Radio, Tom Bilyeu's Health Theory, and the Aubrey Marcus podcast, three of our favorites. She's a lecturer at Stanford and the author of soon-to-be-released The Spark Factor, Supercharge Your Batteries for Limitless Energy and a Fitter, Stronger, More Resilient Future, which Brian and I pre-ordered this morning. Now, I don't know from personal experience, but I hear that Dr. Molly has a gift for pushing love into people's hearts when she hugs them. And today we're going to be talking about love, sex, medicine, and maybe, just maybe, she'll even tell us a story about the time that she accidentally dosed herself with a man's amount of testosterone. Dr. Molly, welcome to the Great Man Within podcast.
Oh my God, Dominic, that intro might have been the best intro I've ever had on a podcast. So well done. Thank you for that.
Well, you know what? We wanted to honor you because you've done such incredible work. And I think the question that's on both our minds is, did you bring any of these love drugs for us to try while we're doing this interview?
Well, first off, where are you guys based?
New York City.
Well, I'm in Austin right now, so no. And, when I started this company, I basically was like really optimistic and idealistic about the psychedelic space. And I was like, we can solve all of our problems with just more love. And then I spent a year studying love. And I realized that I'd opened up a Pandora's box. And as much as I love love, and I really love learning about love, it's a double-edged sword. With all love comes the risk for loss. With all love comes the risk of heartbreak. I mean, everyone we know and love will eventually die. Part of being human is existing in this paradox. And so you really can't study love without understanding the downsides of it as well. I did file a patent for a love drug, and I am working on a nutraceutical that will be a much faster to market product. But we're just now really beginning to understand like how medicines can alter our relationships. We're at the very beginning of like what will probably end up being a revolution in medicine, because it looks like the vast majority of the DSM diagnoses are rooted in lack of love or social injuries due to humans mistreating one another. And so I really feel like, given that this has such a massive influence on human health, like we should be taking a concerted effort to really understand how to improve relationships and also how to heal from trauma and abuse and neglect and all these things that we know cause dysfunctional relationships. And I don't actually claim to be like the world expert on love. I have advisors that are. For example, Helen Fisher, she's the most cited woman on love. And Sue Carter is the woman who discovered pair bonding in prairie voles and is a world expert on oxytocin. So like, I'm more of a communicator than I am like the expert on these things, but I can certainly speak to the complexities of how these medicines will affect our health.
That's beautiful. And maybe to set some context for this discussion would be, in our community, the Great Man Within community, we talk about how men so often lone wolf their lives.
Yeah.
Right. And the lone wolf is the man who's mentally, emotionally, and spiritually going about his life on his own. And many men have grown up with that inner armor, shutting off the emotions because we were taught it's not okay to feel. So I'm just curious, in your studies around love, maybe with specificity to men, what have you found and what are some of those realms that men specifically need to focus on around love?
Well, it's hard to really start to focus on men versus men and women because we have these relationships, right? But if you really look at just like the way that we're programmed from birth, men and women both have these neuropeptides called oxytocin and vasopressin, but women are generally tipped further in the oxytocin department and men are generally tipped further in the vasopressin department. And this was part of evolutionary biology design on, basically vasopressin's job is to help you protect, defend, and be aggressive. And that would have actually kept the tribe alive from neighboring tribes, from animal attacks. So we actually need men to be strong and we need men to be able to defend people around them. But on the other hand, if you look at studies in veterans, for example, what happens is when they come back from war, if they have PTSD, recent research has demonstrated that they have extraordinarily high vasopressin rates and extraordinarily low oxytocin rates. And it's thought that the reason why MDMA has been so effective in PTSD, specifically in the population of veterans, is because it has such a massive impact on oxytocin release. So what it does is it really dramatically increases oxytocin output because of serotonin, causes a flood of serotonin that causes a flood of oxytocin. And it's thought that actually helps reprogram these neuropeptide levels and make them a little bit more balanced. Now, this research still needs to be done to demonstrate this effect, but this is my hypothesis based on what I know about PTSD. And another thing we need to know about is that early life, specifically like the first few years of our lives, are extraordinarily important for programming our behaviors towards others. So we learn about social rewards, we learn about trust and bonding from our interactions with our parents. So if we grew up in a culture that basically praises men for being, unemotional, that praises men for being, like basically not showing that they need love, not asking for help when they need it, then we create a culture where men grow up thinking that like they're not allowed to be able to ask for love when they need it. And that's a really big problem because it's okay for a girl to be emotional, but it's for some reason not okay for a man to be emotional. And like, this is just fundamentally not how we were designed. Like we're all designed to be emotional creatures. Like this is part of being human. Culturally, I think we've really done men a major disservice. But at the same time, I think we've kind of adapted to these behaviors because they essentially served us potentially earlier on in life when things were a little bit more like primitive times and neighboring tribes and like life was just riskier in some ways. But we're living in a modern existence. And we now know that love is fundamental to health. It's fundamental to life. It's fundamental to existence. And like, when I speak of love, I very much specifically speak to things like social bonds. We absolutely need social bonds to thrive. And men who are lone wolves are doing themselves, frankly, a disservice to their own health and to their own longevity. Because at least in the research that I've looked at, like I said, the greatest factor known in long-term health and happiness is human connection. And yet this is just so overlooked. I tend to be like a bit of a futurist and a bit of an innovator and someone who sees trends before they happen. And I think that this knowing of the value of human connection and relationships to our survival is only going to become more and more apparent in the next 4 years, because I believe things are going to get more and more chaotic and more complex and harder to predict. In those conditions, the only way we're going to survive all of the chaos and potentially the internal strife of our country, potentially civil war and world war that could happen, is who we trust. Trust, love, and safety. That's basically the dynamics between oxytocin and vasopressin. And so, like, interestingly, oxytocin in men promotes protection against antisocial influences. So it actually promotes like cohesiveness in social groups, but it also helps you like keep people in the group that are supposed to be in the group and then get people out of the group that are not supposed to be in the group. So as much as I think love is great, it actually can cause social rifts between groups, specifically because it's designed to keep people together that would protect each other. So it's really interesting stuff. In women, as much as it increases trust, safety, and love, it also increases social judgments. It increases kinship recognition. It increases altruism. It increases social approach. But in men, it actually, oxytocin can increase negative social judgments. It can increase social avoidance. It can cause competitor recognition and selfishness. If you really think about a lot of this stuff, it kind of comes back into this primitive programming. Like, we're all trying to hold on to survive on this earth. Like, our programming is to literally survive and reproduce. So I think what almost everybody needs, regardless of like the role of oxytocin in health, is like what everyone does need is we need people that we can trust with our lives. And we need to actually maintain those relationships. And if you're a lone wolf, it's really hard to do that. I would really encourage all men listening to this to like create men's groups. Also develop platonic relationships with women. We didn't grow up in like a society that was all about the nuclear family until very recently. Like, we grew up in tribes where men and women interacted every day, all the time. So the fact that we have this like new relationship with sexuality and love, that's like women are basically told that you need to get married, have a nuclear family, and you need to have these relationships with women, but you're not really allowed to be friends with men. Like, I think men need feminine influence more than ever. I think
100%.
They need platonic, loving touch. And like my communities where I hang out, cuddle puddles, normal place. Yeah. Like, people touch and they care about each other and they snuggle and they cuddle and they feel connected, because we know this is what matters at the end of the day.
Yeah. And so few men understand that that's an actual possibility, because we're so repressed and suppressed that in the presence of a woman, guys go haywire. I get questions all the time. Is it possible to have a platonic relationship with a woman that you haven't slept with yet? It's amazing that these are still the questions that we're asking today, but you just gave a whole bunch of reasons, why that may be possible. So yeah, Brian, I know you had some real zingers that you have dialed up here. So I'd love you to jump in.
Yeah. When you look at the science of workplace and performance, you find that flirting in the workplace is one of the best indicators for great performance. Because it creates that, it creates that, that kind of creative energy. But, and this is a big but, it has to be okay staying there. And oftentimes we get confused when we feel these energies of creativity and performance, and all of a sudden now I want to fuck my coworker.
Right.
And unfortunately, when we cross that line without the right consents in place, we wind up in a place where we get ourselves into a lot of trouble. So like, I like that you're talking about this with the paradox that love is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's get into this a little bit for a second, because I recently heard of a guy who complimented his coworker's shoes and she complained to HR. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, what kind of world are we living in where somebody can't say you have nice shoes on? So I do think that men have to be extra careful in the workplace these days, because of the fact that there's a very, very screwed up, like almost litigious culture around sex in the workplace that is really dividing people, and I think probably degrading performance. At the same time, I also have been kind of a vocal advocate to women to be like, be careful with what you wear at work, because the sexier you look at work, the less people are going to actually listen to what's coming out of your mouth. Like, and I'm just going to say it, it's politically incorrect to say it, but like, women don't realize how men feel in their bodies every day. Not every man has this, but many men, at least men that I know that are super healthy. When you have a ton of testosterone coursing through your veins, any even glimpse of something that's sexual in any way is going to turn you on. And like, I think probably more testosterone than the average woman. I know what it's like to be turned on all the time, because that's generally like how I'm programmed as a woman. I'm not like, I wouldn't consider myself like a normal woman by any means, because I think a lot of women are just like turned off, but men are like designed to have this like really high sex drive, and women, a lot of women as well. But I don't think a lot of women really completely understand what it's like to be so turned on at work, because usually they're just focused on what they're doing. And like I mentioned on Aubrey Marcus's podcast, like if you get a man's amount of testosterone in your body, you'll get why it's different from being a man than a woman.
Yeah. What happened for you?
Sounds like a story.
I mean, I sat on this chair and I was at work, and I was working at a company that was creating custom compounded medicines, hormones, nutraceuticals, really cool company, really great product. People loved it. And some of my coworkers were on testosterone. And so one of them, this guy sat down on the chair before I did. I get to work. I sit down on the chair and I'm like, oh crap, there must be like shoe polish on the like chair polish or something on this wooden chair. And I was like, that's so strange. And then throughout the day, I just started getting more and more horny. And I was like, why am I looking at my bosses and my coworkers like I want to fuck them? Like, what the fuck is this about? And I'm sorry to cuss so much, but I was so confused. I was like, this is so weird. I went to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror and I was like, oh my God, what just happened to you? Oh yeah, it's gotta have been testosterone cream on your arm. Holy shit. And so the rest of the day I just sat in the corner and stared at my computer and like didn't talk to anyone. Because I was like, I could not.
So you shut it off. You're
I,
like, I can't be around people right now.
At anyone right now. Do not
Amazing.
talk to anyone. And the thing is like, it really changed my behavior. And actually, funnily enough, like since moving to Austin, I feel like I'm regaining my femininity. But when I was in the Bay, since that experience, like I dressed more masculine. I covered up. I did not show my breasts. I did not show cleavage. I did not show my body. I had this knowing of, if I'm going to get taken seriously, I can't show myself, because I think I love my body. Actually, I'm really lucky as a woman to love her body, but I'm pretty curvy. And so when I would go and dress really cute at work, nobody was hearing anything I was saying. They were just looking at my body. And when I would dress more, covered up, like I got taken more seriously. Like people just listened to what I had to say. And I hate to say this to women, because women are like, I should be able to dress as sexy as I want, whenever I want. Like, yeah, if you want people to pay attention to what you have to say, you might want to consider that's not the smartest tactical move.
That is the state of affairs as it exists today. And also because we're talking to men where our efforts are to elevate their level of consciousness. Yeah. And in an ideal world, you should be able to wear whatever it is you want and feel safe. And we're not there, right? Yeah. And like we can take opportunities like these to also say, hey guys, there is an opportunity for you to feel what you're feeling and not be that primitive caveman that just, stimulus response. Just like as a man is angry, it's not okay to punch a hole in the wall at work, sure, right? And you had to learn how to overcome that and work to navigate those emotions. So these sexual feelings are just another iteration and level of that, because Brian and I have been to plenty of incredible parties where the container has been set safely for women to wear whatever they want. And these are heaven on earth parties because you get to be 100% of yourself without feeling like there's some predators lurking around. Sure. And everyone is fully expressed. So like we've seen.
I mean, that could be our lives if we wanted.
That could be.
But to get there, basically women do need to feel safe. And I can't tell you, working in Silicon Valley for 10 years, how many times I was sexually harassed, how many times guys grabbed my ass, how many times like really inappropriate things happen. And you just shrug it off. Like, this is the culture. This is Silicon Valley. And arguably, I don't think I want to live in a world where I have to dress extraordinarily covered up and masculine to be taken seriously. I would really like to be able to dress sexy every day and like look hot all the time. But I struggle with it because of the way I was treated and the way that like I realized that there just aren't as many enlightened men as you'd like there to be, and many conscious men who are like aware that, this sexual energy that we have within us is a wellspring of creativity. It's like we are literally within us. We have this force of nature that is like driving us to create, driving us to do all sorts of incredible things. Literally, wars have been won, countries have been conquered, buildings have been created in the name of love, in the name of just wanting to produce and wanting to exemplify this force within us. And I think that gets stifled by just like laziness on the part of people who don't know how to properly communicate and handle their sex energy. And at the same time, like, I think like we're in a really interesting dynamic place right now because we had Me Too, but nobody knows what comes after this, right? Nobody really knows like what comes after Me Too. Like, obviously I've heard some pretty major horror stories of like women who have, for example, had their husbands cheat on them with the nanny and they end up having a baby outside of their marriage. marriage. Like that's not optimal behavior for men. But we need to figure out how to create like a conscious relationship with our sex energy so that it provides us with this extra fuel and wonderful vitality that makes us come alive and it makes it want to get up every day and go to work. I mean, it's up to men like you probably to like do, and maybe even me to talk to women to really figure out how do we enter this new phase of being human where we get to maintain our polarity, right? Like, I really believe that like masculine and feminine polarity is important. Like, I think losing it is a problem. And I have friends that are trans. And one of my good friends is a doctor who does sex change surgeries. So I'm not saying that shouldn't be available to people in society, but I am saying that like, we shouldn't let our masculinity and femininity just be thrown to the side. We shouldn't have to live in a neutral society where like you can't be feminine or masculine every day. Part of the reason why I moved to Texas is because I really enjoy the fact that men are more masculine here and women get to be more feminine here. And it's like acceptable culture to like be a feminine creature. You know, like if you really just look at like the nature of existence, like polarity is life. So like literally positive and negative charge in the cell, creating capacitor and a battery, like it is what powers life. So I believe that life, these patterns of existence are conserved on multiple levels. And I think that like on the human level, losing masculine and feminine polarity is going to be part of the decline of our culture and potentially society.
On that topic, so we're post Me Too. We're trying to figure out like what is our masculine place in this nature, right? Not the nature that our ancestors grew up in, but our nature right here and now. I met Helen Fisher about 5-6 years ago now, and I was running a sexual health company.
Cool.
We were working with dating apps to figure out how to better communicate our sexual health status. And like you said before, there's a plus side to that and there's a big downside to that. The conversation that I had with Helen Fisher was, is there a formula for connection? Because she had all this data, right, for Match.com. Like, is there a formula? And so that was like the social side of the question, if you will, or the big data side of the question. I have the same question for you, but on the biological side. So if psychedelics, and this is a big if, but if psychedelics are an entry point or can be a quicker entry point into the society that we want to live in, right? A more loving, a more open, a more compassionate society. But it's not, there's the dark side and light side. It's not everything. Let's talk about this when it comes to the biology of love.
Sure.
So how much of this, right, is magic? And we just find some sort of connection because we communicated and I like your butt and all the things that come with this versus how much is our biology telling us? How much are we really in control?
Oh my God. I love this question because when I first started studying love, I had such an idealistic, like fairy tale view of things. I was like, yeah, love is so wonderful. And I've had some great loves in this life. Like I'm very fortunate. I've been able to have like really deep, powerful loves and also really deep, powerful heartbreak. I consider even my most painful loves to be my greatest teachers of my existence. But when I started studying the biology of love, I was like, oh shit, how did I not realize that love was a motivational force like hunger and thirst that literally drives us towards one another to maintain proximity, to create touch? Like literally love is like a force that brings people together. And it brings people together because it literally would help us share information and resources and increase the chances of sexual activity and increase the chances of reproduction. And then as love becomes attachment, which is another form of love, more companion love, attachment is like really, really helpful for survival of the family, of the child. So we literally evolved love and this deep pleasure we get from love because of our species wanting to survive. And it's likely that this was one of the main reasons that actually we won over all the other hominids. So yeah, crazily enough, like oxytocin in child rearing actually facilitates growth of the neocortex. If you think about like, so let's talk a little bit about like Helen Fisher's model of love. So she says there's the sex drive, there's the romantic love drive, and there's the pair bonding drive. And she considers all these drives to be intertwined, but they're sort of biologically conserved for different reasons. One would be the sex drive is like, I want to have sex with people because if I have sex with people, then I might have a baby. But also the more you have sex with one person, the more you're going to start getting this romantic love drive that's going to get turned on. And so I have friends that are poly, for example, and By the way, I'm like super laissez-faire for whatever lifestyle people want to have for themselves. So I have tons of friends that are fully monogamous, and I have lots of friends that are fully non-monogamous. And I have like, I know everyone in between. I just don't discriminate. Like I don't choose a social group because like one group is monogamous and one group isn't. That being said, one of my friends who's poly, it was like having a few different affairs with different people. I was like, you know, you're going to fall in love with one of these women, right? And he's like, well, yeah, if it happens, it happens. And I was like, no, it's like going to happen, because when you have sex with people enough, eventually the brain starts turning on the romantic love drive and you start getting addicted to this person. So like, as unromantic as it sounds, romantic love is like an addiction. And so actually we should understand it this way, because you're basically under the influence of drugs and you're an addict when you're romantically in love with someone. And it's funny because we make so many big life decisions in an altered state of consciousness, right? Like people didn't even marry for like love. Like since the 1960s, there was a shift in culture where people really started to prioritize love marriages over status marriages. Status was like the main reason why people married prior to the 1960s. And in a lot of the world, marriage is largely because of status and arranged marriages. So like with this whole emphasis on love is actually a greater reflection of our culture than it is of like the history of humankind. That being said, we know that love is a major advantage. And we know that according to Helen Fisher, some people get really, really lucky because they get to stay in love with this person for long, long periods of time, despite the fact that they should have had these love hormones turn off. And it's likely that these people idealize their partners and focus on the things that they love about their partners. And they use what's called cognitive reappraisal. So you can change the way you feel about anything in life by the way you think about anything in life. So if you sit around and think this person is fucking awful, then that person's going to become fucking awful. When you sit around and say, I love all these things about this person, and yeah, they throw their socks on the floor every day and it bugs me, but like all these other things I love, and I focus on all those other things that I love. So like romantic love, we can continue to cultivate it if we continue to focus on the things that bring us joy and euphoria. But if we focus on the things that bring us resentment and pain, then it will sort of turn it off. Now, the thing about romantic love that's really interesting is that like we actually, almost every person will have romantic love once in their life. Almost every person will experience this magical experience. But what's interesting about MDMA and love drugs is that basically romantic love is largely driven by dopamine. So sex drive is largely driven by testosterone and estrogen. But as we experience the rewards of interacting with people over and over again, then we start getting more and more dopamine. Dopamine is the reward molecule, right? It's pleasure, euphoria, certainty, significance, meaning. And we start attributing this person to all of these things, all these feelings that we're having. Is like, this person is all these things because I'm feeling all these things for this person. So love, it definitely can blind you to the negativity of people's actual character. So it's really important to take things slow versus just like go headfirst into a massive falling in love. Because if you don't take things slow, you're not really going to get to know whether this person is worth attaching to. Other aspects of love that make it really interesting are things like norepinephrine. It's a stress hormone. We actually experience like insomnia and rapid heartbeat and obsession from falling in love with someone. And actually the negative side of love is unhealthy love. So stalking and obsessive compulsive behaviors with people really becoming completely and totally head over heels obsessed with someone can have dangerous consequences. Also, knowing that like you get like this really warm and fuzzy feeling from serotonin, and you get this feeling of sense of home with people. Now, if you get that cut off and you get a breakup, you get massive withdrawal. So breakups are like basically withdrawal from love drugs, your natural love drugs. This is another reason why you really should be really careful with like the medicines that you take with them, because you really shouldn't pour a bunch of extra love drugs on a situation that should naturally be giving you your own innate love drugs inside you, because you're kind of just like doing yourself a slight disservice and really trying to like enjoy the ride where you're at. So after you've had sex with the person enough, you're starting to release a lot of oxytocin with every orgasm. You get dopamine and oxytocin. And that feeling of safety, that feeling of connection, that feeling of being held by someone and being trusting someone, that builds over time as you interact with people. And oxytocin is really important for social bonds. So oxytocin, if you hold a baby, you literally get oxytocin release because you're literally designed to bond to that child. babies that don't have human touch do not thrive. They actually, unfortunately, will usually not survive. And oxytocin facilitates birth. It facilitates lactation. It facilitates the growth of the neocortex in children. It facilitates maternal behavior, parental behaviors, parental bonding, pair bonding, familial bonds, and social bonds. So it's really freaking important. Also orgasm, right? So you get this you basically, it facilitates sexual behavior.
Is it possible if you were to fantasize about someone, so you're not even actually, with them physically, sexually, but you're fantasizing about them, is there a way of creating a bond in that sense because the chemicals, the oxytocin is still being released? I
mean, I have to go look at the research to demonstrate this. I would say 95% sure you're right with that. And I think that's where, how many times have you talked to somebody who's like, and then I was telling this girl that we were in a relationship, she thought we were in a relationship and we have not had that conversation. I've had many guy friends tell me, one of the first things you need to ask a person if you're dating them is, how many people think they're in a relationship with you right now?
That's a great question.
It's a great question because literally a lot of people's relationships start online. And so women and men will start developing these virtual relationships with people, not only online, but in their bodies. So, okay, I don't even know if I should start talking about this. One of my friends was like,
please do though.
Okay, okay. How big is your audience, by the way? How many people listen to this podcast?
Enough.
Right. like 4 people. Go ahead.
Continue. We'll do a test. This will be a test topic. Okay. So since I had this spiritual awakening in 2019, I've had a complete restructuring of my nervous system around sex, where it started with a full body involuntary orgasm that happened out of the blue when I was thinking about, it was actually after a bunch of bioenergetic capacity work that I had done. I was fasting for 3 days. I was super sexually frustrated. I had spent a bunch of time in nature. I had eaten a really beautiful meal. Then I did HIIT training, weightlifting, and sauna. And then I went and hung out with my community. So I could go into why all of these things boost energy capacity, but fasting throws out the batteries that don't carry a charge. It cleans up the kitchen, throws out the proteins that no longer are folded properly. Exercise sends a signal to make more batteries. Sauna is great for autophagy, great for activating heat shock proteins and naturally inducing detoxification responses, which helps the cell function better. And then eating really healthy, nourishing food charges the cells. And then when you're with your community, you're plugged in. But when I was doing all this stuff, I also was super sexually frustrated because I was on a date with this guy. I thought we were going to I thought there was going to be some action. There was no action. And so I go home and in my bed that night, I'm having this thinking about building a company around psychedelics. And I just have this explosive orgasm out of the blue, full body involuntary orgasm. And I'm no touch. And since that experience, I've been working very diligently on my spirituality, on my shadow work, and really working on this goal I've had since I was a child, which was I've always wanted to have the ability to have an orgasm without any touch, with just my mind. I have friends that are tantric teachers and they're this is definitely possible. And it turns out that with enough focus and attention, you can do this. But what I've found out is that, so I can lay in bed and I can be thinking about someone and I can literally start inducing the orgasm from just the thoughts in my brain. So I know there's certainly some oxytocin getting released because my whole body is responding to these thoughts. But I also, on Valentine's Day, induced this by thinking about 2 other people that I really wanted to fall in love. I was thinking about this couple that I'm friends with. And I was like, man, I just really, 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 really want these people to turn out because they would be so good together. And I just wish that they would fall in love. And I had this unbelievable orgasm on Valentine's Day. And I was like, thanks universe. Cause I'm single, but I wasn't expecting that reward. So part of what I want to do is I have these advisors that study love. And I really want to work with Kinsey and start doing studies on people who can do this. Cause I think this could be a massive breakthrough for society. If we could actually teach people that you don't have to have penetrative sex to actually have an orgasm, because think about all this abortion stuff that's going on. Sex is getting riskier and riskier, right? If people knew that this was possible and knew that this was within their reach, it would just transform human relationships because there would be so much fewer risks of having sexual experiences with people if you could have it without the consequences of STIs or pregnancy.
So I know we're not brainstorming here, but if we were, I think that Dr. Molly Maloof should be the next Marvel superhero.
Right?
Who can generate a no-touch orgasm and teach other people how to do it. Like, tell me that's not a superhero.
Honestly, okay, this guy friend was like, Molly, do you have delusions of grandeur? And I was like, looking it up and I was like, no, because like I actually have superpowers. Like this is not, I'm not making this shit up. Like this is not like, I'm not pulling this out of my ass and just like making stuff up. Like I was laying next to this guy.
It's just grandeur. There's no illusion.
Well, the funny thing is that like more than ever, I'm so deeply humbled by existence and by like the fact that like I see the whole universe and I'm like, we are so tiny. Like we are so insignificant. Like we are a blink of time in the history of existence. What I want most people to just hopefully understand is like this thing that we are living, this life that we have right now is so deeply precious and it could be over in a blink of an eye. So you might as well just start living a life of your deepest desires and your deepest service to humanity. And so like I've asked myself, like, what is my deepest service to humanity? What could that be? And really it comes down to people need better food, they need better drugs, and need better sex. Like the biological imperative is all about survival and reproduction. And I just happen to think that sex enabled our evolution, or sorry, not just sex, but drugs did. I think psychedelics enabled our evolution. So like, I want people to associate my brand with like, let's get to the deepest truths of being human. And then let's try to surpass them with some transhumanist ideals to actually become more superheroes, like more superhuman superheroes. Like we have it in us. There's some magical stuff that came from the masters of antiquity that we just need to dig back up and we need to like transmit out to people.
I mean, Dominic, how often are we talking to guys about meditation, healthy food, self-care, taking care of your body, being in community, right? And if they just knew that that could all lead to an orgasm without touching themselves, like
that's right,
the game's over. Like we just hit the jackpot.
You know, like
that's right.
I mean, just think about how much more happy society would be if everybody was having like regular orgasms. Think about the amount of oxytocin. We'd all be connected. We'd all feel so much more love. Honestly, I think it would save the world. And so, I mean, we're all on that journey right now. Like people like us that are coming out and trying to talk about this stuff, like this is a much greater mission than just a podcast. Like this is a mission to like literally raise consciousness so that we don't fucking implode as a country. We are no longer the United States. That is dangerous. Like we have the most weapons in the world and we are no longer united. And we are having 12 mass shootings a week. This is not okay. I actually think that like we need strong men. We need modern knights and modern kings. And we really need to bring chivalry back. We need to bring back these values of like respecting women and honoring women and children and protecting the community and like being loyal and being loving and like being honest and being open and being free. I really think that we need to develop new relationships that enable really deep freedom of both parties, but also connection and trust and love and security, you know, like that's the biggest question is like, how do we create that life?
You're so right. And I remember you saying on one of the podcasts we listened to about how for the first time in your life, you're starting to feel like a stranger in your own country, you know, where you go somewhere else and it's like, okay, I feel more free here. And I was just talking to one of my friends, Gina DiNapoli, Brian, yesterday. She's moved to Italy. She's an Equinox fitness instructor. She came back and she's like, it is so weird here right now, right? Because we are the divided states and it's very difficult for any kind of, to give anyone grace, to hear anyone else's side of the story. And so I guess I'm curious, you know, maybe bringing it back to the love drugs, because when we talked about love drugs, my mind automatically goes to romantic relationships. Sure. And the example I gave in the beginning, which was your example from another podcast about if you've been in a relationship for 10 years, could you bring back, you know, some of the honeymoon phase energy? But is there application on some level where you have world leaders getting together, country leaders getting together, you give them a little slap of whatever you're concocting, and it's like, can we hash this shit out?
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about love drugs and how they can be used and why they're important. And so basically, when I first started this company, and what's probably going to basically be renamed as Dr. Molly, just because basically everyone's telling me that Adama Bioscience, they don't understand the name. And they're like, not Dr. Molly, I get. So when I think about what Molly makes you feel like, it makes you feel connected. It makes you feel sensual. It makes you feel just warm and fuzzy, loving, you know, aroused, euphoric, excited, you know, and you just feel good. Just
for clarification really quick, we're talking about Molly, the drug.
Yeah.
Right. Not necessarily the doctor. And then is that the same as MDMA? Are we
Okay,
all,
so
can maybe just give us a quick
fun story on Molly. Molly was like a marketing tool. They took ecstasy. They were like, we're going to sell ecstasy in a powder form and we're going to call it Molly and we're going to market this. And unfortunately, what happened is that pure ecstasy did get kind of polluted with a bunch of other substances. And so when people were getting Molly, it wasn't always pure ecstasy. It was actually other things. But interestingly, the drug that I've been working on that we're going to finish the patent on this year, it's a poly combination drug. So it's like a poly pill. So there's a few different ingredients in it, which does make it almost impossible to commercialize because the FDA has these rules on combination drugs that require you to do like 9-arm clinical trials. That being said, I think, it's still worth patenting this thing and finishing the patent because it's a great drug. So when you think about love drugs, I experienced a dramatic accidental sexual healing in my late 20s with a partner I was using MDMA with. And I had sexual trauma in college and I had sexual dysfunction as a result. And I didn't know that I had sexual dysfunction, but any man who's listening to this, if you ever are dating a woman and she's like not wet when you're having sex, she's not aroused. And so if she's not aroused, you shouldn't be having sex. But a lot of women can't get properly aroused in sex because of sexual trauma, because their brains are associating sex with danger, not with love and trust. And so it's super important for women to feel safe. But even with some of my partners that I slept with in my 20s, even if I felt safe with them, my brain was so dissociated from my body because of what I experienced that I was experiencing basically a performative act. Like I was present for their pleasure, but I wasn't really receiving pleasure because I wasn't getting wet and I wasn't having orgasms. So situational anorgasmia, sexual pain, hyperactive arousal. I used MDMA with a partner who made it extraordinarily safe, who was really patient, really sensitive, and really kind. And as a result, like all of these sexual dysfunctions just like disappeared. And now it wasn't like one session, it was like multiple sessions over the course of 2 weeks. So that's another downside of drug development. Like the FDA is just not going to let you give people MDMA for like 2 weeks straight. Like they're not going to allow that. And nor would I even recommend that necessarily because MDMA is neurotoxic. Like whether we like it or not, it's a great tool, but it does have downsides. But I thought to myself, and I was, man, wouldn't it be amazing if women could actually experience that level of sexual healing that I had? But then I started opening up the Pandora's box of sexual trauma. And I was like, oh shit. Yeah, there's no way that this is going to go well because you have to really fully vet a person's partner to make sure that they are not an abusive partner because you can get attached to people you don't want to get attached to. So one of the things about this level of oxytocin release and this level of, serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine release is it'll create attachment to people. And so you really, when you take love drugs, you got to be pretty certain that this person is someone you want to be with. One of my friends who's an investor did quite a lot of MDMA with his partner and his wife at the time. And he told me that it led to him to being more attached to her than he would prefer to have been because he wanted to save the marriage, but it didn't work out. And as a result, he felt as though it actually hard for him to go because he was so deep with his wife. And he was like, but I needed to divorce her, but I had this like really deep attachment. So he actually used MDMA to heal from the divorce. So it's like we're playing with this really, really primitive programming, right? Which is why even MDMA for PTSD is key business because in medicine, there's already quite a lot of examples of sexual abuse of patients. And so now we're introducing the conditions where therapists can take this medicine with their patients, knowing fully well that this is a love drug that can induce feelings of love between people. So there's always going to be this major risk of people playing with love medicine and like accidentally falling in love with their therapists. And there's a power differential there. And with the power differentials, it's risky because, as a therapist, like you can get your license taken away, you can be sued, or you can have patients who become obsessed with you. So we need to really study the risks as well as the benefits of these things. That being said, I have plenty of friends that have saved their marriages with psychedelics and MDMA, and they use it very intentionally for reigniting those feelings around every quarter. They take these medicine together, but they do it very intentionally. They do it specifically for a reason of working through problems and feeling more connected and feeling closer. And they seem to be thriving with it. So it can have perks, but I look at the psychedelic space and there's like kind of 4 different categories of use of these different types of medicines. First of all, people should know that a psychedelic is a 5-HT2A receptor agonist. So any drug that like activates that receptor is potentially going to lead to hallucinations and or psychedelic experience. So MDMA is a very mild psychedelic, but it is a psychedelic. But there's essentially the medicinal, like the sort of pharmaceutical, the class of people using medicine to heal from dysfunction. And there's a lot of ways that psychedelics are being used as anti-inflammatories. They're being used for a variety of different reasons in the body. And then there's the spiritual. So there's like a lot of different psychedelic churches that are popping up, and just as many people getting arrested for distributing psychedelics because of their church that they're trying to use as a ways of giving people a sacrament. And then there's recreational, just mushroom caps and going and dancing. And then there's the community and the connection piece, like so the intentional use of psychedelics for creating human connection. And I'm really trying to carve out that as part of my brand, because I am a spiritual person, but not everybody is. And I am a doctor, but not everybody has pathology. And I do believe that we'll like recreate and have fun. But I also think that like, if you party intentionally with the purposes of creating deeper social connections, you get a much bigger bang for your buck. And you're not just like I found a girl in the bathroom at a concert, just like really, like, it was a really unfortunate scene. I'm like, hey, are you on drugs? Are you okay? And she's like, yeah, I'm fine. Please just leave me alone. I want to be in here by myself. That is not healthy. We need people to learn to use these medicines intentionally. And so I'm developing protocols, connecting with yourself, developing your own love for who you are, connecting with your partner, connecting with your closest friends and your family, and then your community at large. So like, we need to create like structures so that people can have intentional, safe use of psychedelic medicines and love medicines to create deeper social bonds, because this enhances survival and because this enhances health. And to me, like, I think we can avoid a lot of disease if we actually just focus on the things that promote health.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. And maybe one final question on the medicine side of things, and then we'll bring this train into the station, would be your love drug that you've patented. And I don't know how much you're allowed to talk about it, but how is it different than, say, MDMA, right? How would it work differently? Would it be more available for more frequent usage? Anything that you're able to tell us about?
Well, I'm working on both a pharmaceutical and a nutraceutical. And the pharmaceutical, we will probably end up licensing to another company to develop, but just because it's like $500 million in 10 years at least to get that thing up to the finish line. But I am developing a nutraceutical that is a really, really beautiful, mild experience that it resembles MDMA, but isn't anywhere near as powerful, or like it's going to be designed as like an entry level connection tool with a protocol attached to it. And yeah, I think that like, it would be great if we could get world leaders together to bond and to take these medicines and to stop fighting and to be more diplomatic. But I wanted to just like, thank you guys for this amazing podcast. And, like, I'd love to talk more about all these topics in a future episode.
Dr. Molly, you've been awesome. Thank you. We're going to do an outro with a link to your book. So for anyone who wants to buy it, is there anything quick you want to say on the book before you have to bounce?
Yeah. So I created this book because I have been a biohacker for like at least since I was in high school. I didn't even know I was a biohacker until it became a movement. But I believe that women should not feel left out of the biohacking movement, but also recognize that like we need to be a little bit more careful with how we approach biohacking. And too many biohacks all at once can actually lead to what's called allostatic load that can break the system. So we are a little bit more sensitive than men to extended fasting, extended ketosis, extended like really intense workouts. And we need to really mind our hormones, because we're just designed to actually protect the tribe and help keep humans alive, other humans alive. So our nervous systems and our hormones are programmed differently than men. Men can withstand a lot more physical challenges and pain without breaking, because that would have enabled them to go out and fight fights and, find food. But women have to be a little bit more careful with our nervous systems and with our hormones. So the book is really all about like my philosophy of health, how to extend your health span. What are the biggest principles of mitochondrial function? How do you understand how to hack your metabolism to avoid prediabetes and diabetes? How do you use blood sugar monitors to optimize health? I ended up being like an expert in blood sugar monitoring because I was one of the first doctors to put CGMs on healthy people. And then at the end of the book is really all about connection. Like, what's the role of connection in health? And the next book I write, I think I want to entitle turn yourself on, because I want the next book to be all about
become a superhero, turn yourself on.
Yeah. I want it to be like all about sexuality and love. So this book touches on these things, but the next book is going to go really deep into these subjects. So this first book is really about metabolism. It's really about feeding yourself, understanding a lot of these different dietary dogmas and really figuring out what works for your body, trying to understand like the biggest drivers of disease that have really affected humanity. And really it really comes down to too much refined carbohydrate, too much refined sugar, too much confined aberration meat, not enough grass-fed, real high quality, wild caught animals, and too much vegetable oil. And so like, and honestly, also too little produce, but there's a lot of people who are like very much anti. I am definitely in the vegetable brigade. I'm like pro vegetables, but I just really want to help people understand. You can cut through all of the simplest if you just look at the big picture. And so I'm trying to teach people that.
That's wonderful. I'm going to link the Spark Factor. That's your book that's coming out in the show notes. And I'll also put a link to your Instagram account. Dr. Molly, thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
Thanks, guys.
You love that conversation with Dr. Molly as much as Brian and I both did. Highly recommend that you follow her on Instagram. I've put the link right there in the top of the show notes. If you're interested in buying her book for you or for the woman in your life, because it's a biohacking book specific for women, you can be a hero by pre-ordering that book. And as always, head over to the Facebook group. Let us know what pearls of wisdom you unpacked from this episode that you want to share and talk about with the men in the community. And that link to the Great Man Within Facebook group is always at the top of the show notes. See you there.